Welcome, Shinya, to the Leaders Who Care series. How are you?
Very good.
I feel like saying, I know we said this before, I got to say it again. Ohayo gozaimasu and konnichiwa.
Ohayo gozaimasu. Konnichiwa. Yeah.
And I'll leave it to the audience to look that up and figure it out if they don't know what that means. So, but they should know what that means. So, hey, listen, it was great to meet you at the Verde Exchange conference. I was really impressed with what you're doing and what you've done with your company and the impact that you're making. So that's why I'm super interested about sharing it with our audience and telling them how you're gonna do your part to change the world and make it better, right? So let's start with if you can introduce yourself. Not the business yet, we'll get to that, but just say, who are you? Where are you from originally? Where are you from? Where now? What about family? What's your favorite color, if you want to tell us that? Maybe something you've never told anybody, and this is the time you want to tell everybody, stuff like that. So go for it.
All right. So my name is Shinya Shimizu, the founder and CEO of Elephantech. And yeah, I'm not going to do, a business. So I was born in Japan, Osaka, Japan, and I was brought up in Japan, and I'm based in Tokyo. And so to be honest, I'm kind of, very domestic person. I was born in Japan, brought up in Japan, and I actually spent not a lot of time in anywhere other than Japan. So I'm very domestic, and I'd say I love science. So while I'm doing very science-oriented startup, my kind of hobby and weekend is, reading scientific paper or, learning more science, physics. So I love science. So that kind of person.
I guess you love science. What about family? Do you have parents, family, siblings?
Yeah, so my family is like my family is actually a farmer in Osaka, and I have my family is like doing has been farming for like 200 years, 300 years. So when I took a when I look back to my father, grandfather, it's like a farmer, 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 and suddenly entrepreneur. So it's kind of mutant type of thing. So yeah.
Well, you could have gone into farming technology if you wanted to. Uh,
Surely, yeah, that's actually one of my interest area. Probably, yeah, that uh, you know, I am gonna tackle it somewhere in my life. But yeah, anyway, definitely not, just taking over my family farm, but farming technology, ag tech is really interesting area, which also has a great impact for humanity. So yeah, I'm
yeah,
really interested in this.
definitely. We not to get off the subject, but we're doing a lot of work in ag also, and one of the goals is to get younger people to be interested in farming, but not the farming that the father and grandfather did, the new type of farming. So that could be your next career, maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
When you were a kid or a teenager, were you also reading a lot? Were you building things or taking them apart? Did you play music, sports? What were you like? What were you like as a kid?
Well, when I was a kid, so I was, when I was in elementary school, I was already a science kind of guy, and I actually learned, when I was in elementary school, I learned, electromagnetics or kinetics or
Wow.
quantum physics, relativity, those kind of scientific spelling. So that was really something I liked, and that a little bit different hobby or activity I did when I was in a school was when I was in high school, I was doing something like a kind of actor, club kind of thing. So, that's so probably some of those experience as a kind of actor is, kind of contributing to my presentation or, public speaking or those things. But yeah, but generally very science, so science-based guy.
So hold it. You learned, hey, while you were here, we could have introduced you to an agent to become a movie star, you know?
That's I'm kind of seriously interested in that one, but Matt, probably yeah, I choose to go with science, but
Well, you're right. The education you got from doing that always helps in presentations and public speaking and dealing with people. I have two kids, one that's continued in acting, and when they were younger, they did acting classes, and it was great because they learned how to be with adults. They learned how to be, and in discussions and talking. So it's great. It's great background. That's very cool. So you learned physics and all that in elementary school?
yes, I did.
Oh my gosh. That's incredible to me. Is that how you decided to go to get an engineering education at the University of Tokyo because you were already intrigued about that?
Yes. Yeah, so I was like, it was not a really obvious choice, to be honest. I really loved any kind of science and engineering field. So when I was in high school, I was in chemistry Olympic in Japan. Actually, I'm actually one of the best. I got one of the best score in there. So I did chemistry, so physics, any kind of science. But for me, at that time, information engineering really looked really fascinating to me because it is at the time. It's not, I was actually majoring. My research for my bachelor's thesis was natural language processing, which is related to something like ChatGPT or something.
Yeah.
I was really interested in how how artificial intelligence can understand languages. So which was really kind of new area to me. So I'm always really eager to learn something that is new to me. So at that time, that's computers, learning, understanding languages is really new to me and really interesting. I would say it's almost also promising for me. So yeah, I decided to go to information engineering and learning those natural language processing and speech recognition, those things.
So then how did it come about that you ended up going to McKinsey for business analysis rather than IBM or somewhere?
Yeah, so great question. So it is not uh clear. It is also not an obvious path for me. I mean, when I was looking for my job, I mean, I was seriously, looking for opportunity to be a doctoral course or scientist researcher, as well as joining electronics company or any kind of options. But I found that when I was doing research at university, the most important thing, something that is most important and something that is most, probably most suitable for me is like, connecting this basic science and commercialization. I mean, um, at the university, there are a lot of kind of great technologies, but no one was actually commercializing it. The problem, and especially in Japan, there's not a lot of entrepreneurs, to be honest. So so that's what I really wanted to do. But I was a scientist, researcher, so I have no idea about business. So so I need to learn business to get those commercialization and engineering from basic science. So I decided to choose to go McKinsey to learn business, kind of, yeah.
No, that's actually brilliant. I mean, I got into accounting and finance, and I ended up going to Deloitte. I never really wanted to be a partner in a CPA firm and just do accounting the rest of my life, but I did it because it was a foundation to learn for whatever business I was going to go into. So that makes sense. Did you get specific clients to work on that were tech or science related, or not?
Yes, actually. So I cannot disclose, of course, the specific company's name, but my clients are generally automotive manufacturer, Japan, and in Japan and in Germany, and yeah, so very engineering, science, manufacturing, these type of companies are my clients. So it was a really great experience to know how large corporates work and what large corporates are not really good at. So it was really great to learn those.
No, that's brilliant. Was there a plan? Did it ever enter your mind to stay in consulting, or did they want you to stay in consulting, or were you always thinking there's got to be something else?
Great question. Um, so personally, I never thought I am spending my kind of long career in McKinsey or any kind of consultant, because I'm a scientist. I what I want to achieve in my life is doing something like bring science to real world to make the world better, those kind of things. So definitely not consulting.
Yeah, they probably knew that too. Um, so when and how did the idea light bulb, when you have a light bulb idea, when did that happen to co-found and lead as a CEO on the mission of Elephantech? And actually, why that name? And how did you come up with the mission? And it's a three-part question, really. And how and you of the company research? Talk about all the research you've done over the initial years.
Yeah, so absolutely. So ideal light bulb, it was actually not that, ideal light bulb type of moment. Rather than that, I was actually looking for any kind of opportunities to start up. So it's not my first idea. And, I was discussing with a lot of professors at universities, discussing with a lot of, colleagues at McKinsey, and kind of choosing or assessing a lot of ideas. So those ideas, we have I had actually a lot of ideas, and one of them are something I really want to do. I still want to do. So that is wireless, let's say wireless power transmission. So which is a really game-changing technology. So I was rather than just ideal light bulb. So I was choosing or assessing many technologies. So, but so the frequent question I get is what? So you majored natural language processing, and so which is AI. Promising areas, right? So, but not AI. But why not AI? Why manufacturing, which is very definitely not the most popular area for startup. So the reason why here is that the reason why I chose this technology to start my company is this technology is has a potential to really change the basics of the world. So I mean, write a new page uh, of the human beings' history of science, I'd say. So so if this technology is successfully commercialized, the most of the electronics manufacturing, including laptop, iPhone, and those any kind of electronics devices use this technology, so which is really a game changing, which is kind of hard to make it happen. When I tackle the software engineering, software business, because let's say for software business, a little number of startups or companies are really inventing a new technology, and most of others are adapting or using those technologies to real world. So yeah, so I really needed the real scientific innovation. So that's why I decided to choose this technology to start. And so why the name? So the name here is, there are three main reasons. So one is they're big. I want to be big. So, so I don't want to be like a kind of niche type of company, and I want to be big. So I would like to replace most of the electronic circuit board in the world. So which is great, and so big, and so electronics technology company. So I really wanted to come up with some new word that includes the technology and electronics. So it's like electronics technology, so Elephantech. And third one is like, this is global technology. So for sure. So we don't have a lot of domestic market. So, this technology has to be a global technology, global brand. So then especially for Asia. But so it's kind of hard to make the company name well remembered over a lot of countries. But elephant is really obvious. I mean, icon. So especially in Asian countries, elephant is really good animal. So yeah, it is kind of the aim was really successful kind of. So
Yeah, no, I think it's a brilliant name. I know you're asked that question all the time, I'm sure, which is it means you named it very successfully because they're asking more about it. So it's fantastic. Talk to us a little bit about, because you mentioned this to me when we met, all the research that
yep.
done over the years and how that evolved.
Yeah, so it is a kind of tough part. It actually took a lot more than I expected when I started this company. I actually I founded this company 9.5 years ago, so it is a lot. So when I started this company, I expected to spend like 2-3 years for R&D or something, but it turned out to be like 6 to 7 years for basic R&D with almost no revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was so tough because, what I did at the time is really a basic research, including some material composition. And, for those basic scientific development is something like, I say, it can be completed tomorrow, or alternatively 10 years later. I mean, do you know what I mean? So if you find a specific great composition or formulation of material, it suddenly it's okay. But I don't know. It's incredibly difficult to estimate how long do we actually need to come up with the right composition, right formulation, because it's really new to the human beings. So it is a kind of tough year, but yeah, I did it, kind of. So
And do you have like a team around you, or how did that come about?
yes, yes, but it is a really a small team. So it's like 5 to 10 people, and after 6-7 years since foundation, it is like 20 or like that. So it's currently we have 100 people. So I mean, yeah. So I had a very small team, and I'm actually the CTO of this company as well, the CTO and CEO. So I was a chief risk scientist. So I wrote patent. I made some experiments by myself. So yeah, it is a fun but tough moment.
So you when you wake up in the morning, if you're talking to the boss, you're talking to yourself.
Yeah, yeah, kind of. Yeah, those. Yeah, actually, and yeah, it is so tough. And uh, you know, I have a lot of trouble. I had a lot of trouble in my body. I mean, I got sick, and I was almost, like almost collapsed. Kind of. So it was a tough day, but yeah.
Welcome to startups, right?
You're welcome to startups. Yes. Yeah.
So who would be the typical customers that you would be looking for?
Yeah. So that is a great question. So I mean, that's Normally, electronics manufacturers, let's say Samsung, can be Samsung or LG or Apple, Dell or HP, or those kind of electronics manufacturers are my client. Yeah, let's say it can be Sony, Nikon, those companies. But the point is, when I founded this company, no one, almost no one, believed that the electronics manufacturers, started to buy components because of environmental impact. I mean, electronics manufacturing is really a conservative, especially a purchasing of components is really conservative and cost intensive. So yeah, at the time, yes, circuit boards manufacturing, electronics manufacturing is bad for environment, but this is what it is. So what's wrong, right? Circuit board manufacturing bad for environment, but yeah, so we need to buy it. So so that was something I really struggled, and I would say I'm still struggling because it's really depends on the companies. I mean, the attitude for environmental impact is really depending on. It's really not. Depending on companies. I mean, let's say Apple decided or declared to totally decarbonize their supply chain. So I like 2013, by 2013 they gonna make the whole supply chain carbon neutral, so which is really a challenging target. But on the other hand, some of the electronics manufacturers are saying like aiming for kind of carbon neutral level by 2050 or 60 or those kind of things, so which is way the way insufficient, I mean, for climate change. But so it really depends, and I'm still struggling. And most of the companies are really not really aggressively looking for our environmentally good solution, because let's imagine that if you choose if you are a component buyer at Apple and you choose environmentally good circuit boards and put it on iPhone, and there's some quality issue happens in iPhone, then you need to kind of recall or something. It's yeah, it's hard, right? So yeah, so it's really reasonable. They're really conservative, but we need change. So circuit boards manufacturing is really bad for environment, and then actually, yeah, 10% of the carbon footprint of Apple's manufacturing is coming from circuit boards. So which is huge. So we need to come up with some solution, but so it's getting better, but the problem is most of the electronics manufacturers are not really like Apple. So
Yeah, well, talk a little bit about though the environmental impact you can make when you explained the difference between recycling, let's say, a whole laptop or whatever versus your process, your method of doing that.
all right, so so to explain it, so let me quickly introduce what's the difference between the conventional method of manufacturing circuit boards and ours. So conventionally, they use etching, or alternatively, I'd say photolithography or subtractive process. So which is a process where they first form a layer of copper, and then remove unnecessary part from the copper foil, and they use a remaining part as a wiring. So which means that normally, so they dispose 70-80% of copper, and they just use 20 or 30% of copper for wirings. And so during those removing copper removal process, they use etching liquid, so which is a kind of course, a toxic liquid that removes copper, and you get a lot of toxic waste, including copper and some toxic, etching liquid. So, which is really bad for environment. But in our method, with our method, we can directly print copper substrate, and then apply electrolysis copper plating to increase the thickness of the copper. So which is, additive way compared with existing subtractive way. So which is by nature good for environment. We can drastically reduce the material consumption and carbon footprint. Yeah, we can save 70% of copper, 75% of carbon footprint, and 95% of water. And we are not really using, we're using almost no water. So, which is great. And at scale, at commercial scale, we can also decrease cost because, we can reduce the material required a lot. So, which is great technology. And so you mentioned a little bit about the recycling, but the problem here is in most cases, those removed copper, etched copper is not recycled because, copper is the first cheap. And the etched copper it's hard to recycle because it's a kind of liquid and the copper content is like, probably 5% or 2%. So it's really a thin copper material. And they have a lot of not desirable, a lot of toxic materials. So it's very hard to recycle. And technically they can recycle, but that requires a lot of energy, which is also bad for environment,
right.
And a lot of additional chemicals, which is also bad for environment. Right. So the point here, the excellence of our technology is, it's also my belief that the best way to reduce environmental impact is reduce material. So for you to use materials, I mean, let's say copper. So we need mines, we need smelting, a lot of processes, and we need to transport. So reducing material is much better way than working hard on recycling. So yeah, that's something we're tackling, and which is really great for environment, of course, and social impact as well, because those toxic waste is actually becoming a big problem in China and as well as in India. So
yeah, it's a huge problem. In fact, even simple stuff like for years they've been talking about recycling, especially here in the States and whatnot, bottles and this and that, whatever. But they found that a lot of the recycling is causing as much problems just because of what you said, what they have to do with the energy and this and that and that. So it seems to me like what you've got is something special. Now you just so hopefully all those years of research and development, now you can turn it into an elephant, so to speak, which would be fantastic. It's really fascinating, and the social impact that or the environmental impact and the social impact that you can make seems like spectacular. One last question before we kind of complete on this. When we talk about how the fourth industrial revolution is about technology, AI, etc. But the fifth industrial revolution they're talking about is really about humanity. And with the impact you're looking to make, it is benefiting humans because you're benefiting the environment, because you're benefiting the communities. You're also benefiting employees and their families, and people could be proud of where they work because of the good stuff that you're doing. Talk a little bit about that and what you see the future looks like, not just in Japan, but bringing this globally.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, so that is really an important point, and that I really want to do in my life. And Elephantech exists to make the world sustainable. So so Elephantech's technology itself is really put the human beings one step ahead. Especially in the electronics manufacturing field. So the human beings only had a kind of unsustainable way to manufacture those circuit boards, but so now we have this one. So we have this sustainable way. So that's what we're doing, and which is great for employees and other stakeholders as well. Because as you mentioned, fifth is about humanity, and the fifth is about humanity. And I believe so. The most precious and the most important, one of the most important work the human beings need to do is that develop a technology that enable human beings keep living on the earth. And actually, which is not very easy, which is not really obvious, because so let's say climate change is really happening, and we need to reduce carbon footprint, but we don't have, the human beings still don't have enough technology to solve all the industry, all the carbon footprint issues. So we need to come up with new technologies that which is really great for employees and stakeholders, because our employees' satisfaction, I'd say, is really high, because they believe they are doing right, they are doing something right.
Yep.
So in the past, in the history of electronics manufacturing, and most of those toxic and environmentally bad industries, we are pushing those environmentally bad factory and facilities to the developing countries. I mean, China, or alternatively Thailand, and those countries, but which is not right? So which is not sustainable. So rather than just pushing those environmentally unsustainable facilities to developing countries, but developing a technology that really saves the environmental impact and toxic waste in developing countries is really good for satisfaction of employees, satisfaction for myself. So which is a great theme to tackle. So,
I think what happens also is if employees feel they're doing right, and then the kids of the employees see what's going on also, and they want to do right, and then a whole different mindset starts happening instead of the opposite of just doing to make money only type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's super important, and the younger generation feels wants that more than ever right now. So good job on that for sure. And so last question on this thing here is when in 2021, a client told me, it was really interesting. He said, Mark, the year 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. It's really an interesting comment. And the last few years have been kind of crazy in general. So with that, can you tell us what you're most grateful for, and also what you're most hopeful for?
Yeah. So I am grateful for and hopeful for is like, I mean, so human beings, the people are looking more for more social good and environmental good things. So toward the end of the year, so I mean, more and more companies, more and more people are working seriously, start to work seriously on those environmental impacts, social impact, and especially in Japan. To be honest, Japan is one of the least environmentally serious country to environment. So, but things are really rapidly changing, especially in this year. This year is a kind of pivotal moment, pivotal year. I mean, with respect to the consciousness, or with respect to like attitude to environment and social impact. So I'm hopeful for and kind of grateful for is people really are changing the attitude to the environmental impact and social impact. So by the end of the year, probably, hopefully, more and more companies decided to make their supply chain carbon neutral. I mean, so for business, or so reducing water consumption, or saving biodiversity, or more and more companies and people are doing pledge for that is really something I'm hopeful for. So.
Yeah, well, we all are, and I met a Japanese delegation a couple of years back that they all came in with the sustainable development pins, the Sustainable Development Goals. They came in with pins, and they were all about SDGs. So I'm hoping that Japan's going to really push towards what you're saying. And thank you for sharing your company, what you're doing in the world, and keep working hard on it because it's important. So
Surely, yeah.
So we appreciate you joining us and being a leader who cares, because you really are a leader who cares.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.